You know, there's a moment in life when the world starts to feel a little quieter. The house empties out, friends move away, or maybe you've just settled into a routine that doesn't include as many voices as it once did. If that's where you are right now, if you've ever sat at the kitchen table wondering, how did I get so lonely in a world full of people? I want you to know something: you're not alone. And more importantly, you weren't meant to be alone. That's the thing about being human. We're wired for connection. For shared laughter over a cup of coffee, for hands to hold during hard times, for stories that remind us we're part of something bigger. And today, I want to talk about how community, the kind we build intentionally, with purpose and heart, can be the key to not just surviving this chapter of life, but thriving in it. Let me tell you about my neighbor, Margaret. After her husband passed, she spent months withdrawing, turning down invitations, letting her garden overgrown, even avoiding the mailbox to dodge well-meaning questions. Then one morning, she found a note slipped under her door. It was from a women's knitting group that meets at the community center. The note said, "We saved a chair for you." Simple. No pressure. Just an open door. Margaret told me later, "I didn't go for the knitting. I went because someone remembered I existed." That group became her anchor. They celebrated birthdays, mourned losses, and eventually, they helped her replant that garden. That's the power of community. It's not about grand gestures. It's about showing up for others and for yourself. Now, you might be thinking, but where do I even start? Maybe you've lived in the same town for decades but still feel like an outsider. Or perhaps you've moved somewhere new and don't know a soul. Here's the good news: building community isn't about being the life of the party. It's about finding your people, the ones who make you feel seen. Let's talk about how. First, think small. You don't need a crowd, just a few kindred spirits. My friend Carl found his tribe at the local library's history club. They meet every Tuesday to discuss books about World War II. For him, it's not just the stories, it's the shared passion, the debates over coffee, the way they check in on each other when someone misses a meeting. Start with what you love. Gardening, painting, chess, baking, there's a group out there waiting. And if there isn't? Start one. My cousin Edna put a sign up at her grocery store, looking for fellow birdwatchers. Beginners welcome. Within a week, 6 people showed up with binoculars. Now, they've got a standing date at the park every Sunday. The point is, you don't need permission to create connection. Just a little courage to say, "Me too." But let's be honest, reaching out can feel scary. What if you're rejected? What if you don't fit in? Here's what I've learned: most people are just as hungry for connection as you are. They're waiting for someone to make the first move. So send that email. Attend that club meeting. Invite a neighbor over for pie. And if it feels awkward at first, that's okay. Awkward is where growth begins. Here's a simple step to try this week. Make a list of 3 places or activities that light you up. Maybe it's a volunteer gig at the food pantry, a watercolor class, or even an online forum for vintage car enthusiasts. Then, choose one and take action. Call, sign up, or just show up. You don't have to commit forever, just give it a chance. And if it doesn't click, try something else. This isn't about perfection. It's about curiosity. I'll never forget the first time I walked into my book club. My hands were shaking, and I almost turned around. But then a woman named Lois handed me a plate of cookies and said, "We've been waiting for you." Turns out, they hadn't, but it sure felt like they had. That's the magic of showing up. So, what's next? Well, this is just the beginning. Because once you've taken that first step, you'll start to notice something beautiful. The more you give to your community, the more it gives back. And that's when the real journey begins. You know, when I first started reaching out to build my own community, I worried it would feel like homework, another chore on the list. But then I realized something. True connection isn't about adding more to your plate. It's about sharing the plate. Let's talk about how to nurture those relationships once you've found them, and how to keep them from fading when life gets busy or seasons change. Take my friend Harold. He joined a men's breakfast group at his church after retiring. For months, they met every Thursday, eggs, coffee, stories about grandkids. Then winter hit, and folks started canceling. Harold almost let it fizzle out, but instead, he picked up the phone. "Hey, Bill, want to meet at my place this week? I'll make the pancakes." Just like that, the group revived. The lesson? Community thrives on consistency, not convenience. It's the small, steady efforts that build trust. Here's a tip: schedule it. Literally. Write "Call Helen" on your calendar every Tuesday. Set a reminder to email your walking buddy. It's not impersonal, it's intentional. And if you're the one organizing, rotate responsibilities. Maybe Martha hosts book club this month, and George brings snacks next time. Shared ownership keeps everyone invested. My cousin Ruth started a recipe swap group years ago. They'd meet monthly to share dishes and secrets. But over time, it became more about the gossip than the goulash. So they pivoted. Now, every meeting has a theme: comfort foods from childhood or the one recipe that saved your marriage. It's still fun, but it's focused. The takeaway? Don't be afraid to redefine the purpose of your group as it grows. Communities, like people, evolve. Now, let's address a quiet fear many of us have: what if I become a burden? Maybe you're dealing with health issues or grief and don't want to bring down the mood. But here's the truth: vulnerability is the glue of real connection. My neighbor Ida taught me that. After her stroke, she hesitated to join her gardening club again, worried she'd slow them down. But when she finally went back, they surprised her. They'd built raised beds so she could tend to plants from her wheelchair. "We need your eye for roses," they told her. Letting others support you isn't weakness, it's grace. If you're struggling to ask for help, start small. Text a friend, "Could use your advice on something." Or at your next gathering, say, "I've been feeling a little lonely lately, anyone else?" You'll often find nods of relief. And if you're on the other side, if someone shares a need, respond with specifics. Instead of "let me know how I can help," try, "Can I bring you soup on Tuesday?" or "I'll drive you to the doctor next week." Concrete offers build bridges. Communities are like gardens. They need tending, not just planting. Water the relationships that matter. Pull the weeds of resentment before they take root. And don't forget to celebrate the blooms. Speaking of which, let's talk about rituals. My friend's knitting group marks every birthday by making a silly hat for the guest of honor. Another group I know lights a candle at meetings to honor absent friends. These little traditions create a sense of belonging that outlasts any single gathering. But what if conflict arises? Maybe someone dominates conversations, or politics creeps in. First, breathe. Disagreement doesn't mean disaster. Set gentle boundaries: "Let's keep this space for shared interests." Or assign a talking stick, literally or figuratively, to ensure everyone gets a turn. Remember, the goal isn't uniformity. It's respect. My bridge club once had a spat over, well, bridge rules. We solved it by laughing it off over lemon cake. Sometimes, dessert is the best mediator. Here's the beautiful thing: every effort you make ripples outward. When you show up for others, they show up for someone else. Take Stan, who started driving a neighbor to chemo. That neighbor's daughter now volunteers at a senior center. It's a chain of care, and you hold the first link. So this week, I challenge you: do one thing to deepen your community ties. Reconnect with an old group. Share a skill: teach someone to bake your famous pie, or ask them to teach you something new. Or simply sit with someone and say, "Tell me your story." Because here's the secret no one tells you: communities aren't just about support. They're about legacy. The memories you make now, the bonds you nurture, they become the stories that outlive us. And that's how we rise together. You know, there's a story I've been carrying with me for years. It's about my grandmother, Eleanor. After my grandfather passed, she moved into a small apartment, convinced her days of making a difference were behind her. But then she started baking bread for her neighbor, a young single mom working 2 jobs. That bread turned into weekly dinners, then into tutoring sessions for the mom's kids. By the time Grandma left us, her apartment was a hub for half the building: students, retirees, even the mailman. She used to say, "You don't need a big life to leave a big mark. You just need to show up." That's the heart of community, isn't it? It's not about how many people you know or how often you meet. It's about the quiet, steady way we lift each other, and in doing so, discover parts of ourselves we'd forgotten. So let's talk about how these connections don't just change our days, they change our legacy. Take my friend Irene. At 78, she started volunteering at an after-school program, teaching kids to knit. At first, she worried they'd find her out of touch. But those kids? They didn't see age. They saw someone who listened, who didn't rush them. Now, she gets letters from former students saying things like, "You taught me patience isn't just for yarn." Irene's community expanded across generations, and in that exchange, everyone grew. If you're thinking, "But what can I offer?" Start with what's in your hands. Share a skill, a story, a batch of cookies. Mentor a young person. Join an intergenerational book club. These bridges aren't just good for the soul, they're good for the world. And don't underestimate the power of simply being present. Sometimes, the greatest gift you can give is your attention. Maybe you're sitting there thinking, "It's too late for me to build something meaningful." Let me stop you right there. My friend Walter started a men's choir at 82. They perform at nursing homes now, voices raspy but full of heart. One member told me, "I spent decades thinking I had nothing to sing about. Now I know better." It's never too late to create ripples. Here's the truth: communities aren't just about solving problems. They're about celebrating the ordinary miracles, the shared laugh over a misplayed card game, the comfort of a familiar voice on the phone, the pride in seeing someone you've encouraged take flight. These moments stitch us into a tapestry that outlives us. Softly, with conviction. So, if you take one thing from our time together, let it be this: you matter. Your presence matters. Your story matters. And there's a corner of this world, maybe a book club, a volunteer shift, a porch swing, where you're not just needed, but cherished. All you have to do is step into it. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me, what's one small way community has lifted you up? Or maybe a dream you have for connecting with others. Let's inspire each other. And if this video resonated with you, hit that like button, it helps others find this conversation. Oh, and subscribe if you haven't yet. We've got so many more stories to share, and I'd love for you to be part of ours. As Grandma Eleanor would say, the best communities aren't built in grand gestures. They're built in the spaces between people, where laughter echoes, hands meet, and hearts remember they're not alone. So go on, friend. Your chair is saved. The coffee's brewing. And the world is waiting for the light only you can bring.